The light begins as a distant point in the sky, no larger than a morning star, an artificial sun rising over the world of men. For a fraction of eternity, silence. Then, the sound arrived. It was not the familiar thunder of artillery, nor the tearing of the sky by a bomber. It was the sound of the very fabric of the universe being split in half. A pressure wave that did not just knock down buildings, but disintegrated them, reducing centuries of civilization to atomic dust. And then, the heat. A heat that did not burn, but evaporated. That left the shadows of humans imprinted on walls that no longer existed, carbonized ghosts in an eternal instant. It was the morning of August 6, 1945. The city was Hiroshima, and the world they knew, had just died. In the steaming rubble, there were no screams. The death had been too quick for some, too absolute for others. The survivors dragged themselves like sleepwalkers, skin hanging in tatters, their eyes vacant with an understanding that went beyond pain. They called it Picadone, the flash and the boom, a childlike word for an event of pure adultery against nature, as the radioactive dust began to settle like evil snow. A question hung in the air, a question that would echo through the decades, poisoning the victory, staining history. What had they done? And why? Aboard the Enola Gay, a B-29 baptized with the pilot's mother's name. The initial euphoria turned into a heavy silence. Colonel Paul Tibbets, a man chosen for his coolness and competence, kept his hands firm on the controls. He had fulfilled his mission. But behind his eyes, a storm was beginning to form. The navigator, Theodore Van Kirk, looked back at the mushroom cloud, now rising like a monument to their own action. It was no longer a cloud. It was a living thing, a twisted, pulsating tower, climbing into the sky, a funnel connecting the hell they had created to the heaven they had betrayed. "My God," someone whispered over the intercom, a hoarse and unrecognizable voice. "What have we done?" There was no answer, only the constant hum of the engines, the monotonous sound of normality on a morning that was anything but normal. In Tokyo, in the halls of the Imperial Palace, the confusion was total. Communications with Hiroshima had simply ceased, an absolute silence. A pale general reported to the emperor that the city had been hit by a new weapon of incalculable power. Language, in the face of the unimaginable, proved impotent. Meanwhile, in Potsdam, President Harry S. Truman received the news with a grave expression. "This is the greatest thing in history," he told reporters, a statement that was both a triumph and a confession. But in his private memoirs, doubt had already taken root. He would later write about the terrible weight of the decision, a burden he would carry for the rest of his life. The decision had not been taken lightly. It had been forged in the long, shadowy corridors of the Manhattan Project, a parallel universe of geniuses and secrets, where the monstrous baby of the atomic age was born. J. Robert Oppenheimer, the man who gave birth to this new god, quoted Hindu scripture upon witnessing the first test at Alamogordo. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." But they were just words. The reality came over Hiroshima, and when photographs of the charred bodies, the children with melted skin, began to secretly reach the eyes of the very scientists who had built it, many of them broke down. Leo Szilard, one of the fathers of the bomb, had begged Truman not to use it against a city full of civilians. His petition was ignored. The war machine, once set in motion, had its own logic, an insatiable hunger for resolution. The argument was simple, brutal in its clarity. An invasion of Japan would cost 500,000 American lives, perhaps millions of Japanese. The bomb would shorten the war. It would save lives in the end. It was a lesser evil. A macabre equation, in which abstract numbers weighed more than the actual flesh and blood under the mushroom cloud. But was it true? Was Japan not already on the brink of surrender? Documents declassified decades later would reveal that Emperor Hirohito was already seeking a negotiated way out, with the sole condition of keeping his throne. The Soviet Union was preparing to declare war on Japan, a blow that, by itself, could have forced capitulation. The bomb, some historians would say, was not the final act of the Second World War, but the first move of the Cold War, a demonstration of force aimed not at Tokyo, but at Stalin, a warning written in nuclear fire. The future belonged to America, and it would not hesitate to use it. If this was true, then the 140,000 souls of Hiroshima were not just victims of a war, but of a new and more terrible conflict that had not yet begun. Their sacrifice was the prelude to decades of mutual terror, the first chapter in the history of the fear that still defines us today. 3 days later, a second bomb fell on Nagasaki. This time, the primary target was obscured by clouds. The bomber, boxcar, wandered over the city, burning precious fuel. The pilot, Major Charles Sweeney, decided to proceed with the secondary target. It was an act of improvisation with cosmic consequences. The Urakami Valley, the Catholic heart of Japan, was obliterated. Cathedrals, convents, faithful all, evaporated in the same instant. The irony was biting. A weapon conceived by a Judeo-Christian civilization had annihilated one of its own most eastern communities. Japan's surrender came quickly thereafter. The emperor, in an unprecedented broadcast, spoke to his people in an ethereal, distant voice. He asked them to endure the unendurable. The world breathed a sigh of relief. The most destructive war in human history was over. But the price of peace was written in the streets of two cities, not in letters, but in shadows. The physicist Isidore Robbie, upon learning the details of Hiroshima, felt a void in the soul. He realized that humanity had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. We were no longer just capable of killing by the thousands. We were capable of ending everything. The very nature of our species had changed, and in the silence that followed the war, as the world rebuilt itself, the two questions remained, hanging like the mushroom cloud over the collective conscience of humanity. Was it necessary? Was it right? There is no easy answer. Only the echo of the explosions and the silent weeping of those left behind. The Hiroshima bomb was not just an event, it was a mirror. And when we look into it, we see not only history, but our own reflection, our capacity to rationalize horror, our ease in sacrificing the other on the altar of our own security, our terrible, frightening capacity to create the end of the world. And the question that remains, the only one that truly matters, is, have we learned anything?